The CodeSite logging system is an advanced debugging and application logging system, meaning that it works through the whole development cycle, from development through testing all the way to deployment. And its main purpose is that it gives developers deeper insight into how their code's executed. And the benefit of that is that it helps developers locate problems more quickly. And there's a very reactive approach when using CodeSite. Log some messages, react to the logging data that you capture, and then respond to it. Whereas when you do traditional debugging, breakpoints, and so forth, it becomes very proactive, which tends to be a lot slower. CodeSite supports both live logging, which is great during the development and testing cycles, and file-based logging, which is appropriate for production environments or deployment to end users' machine. CodeSite supports both local and file destinations, local and remote destinations, and the remote destinations is only available in the Studio edition, which I'll discuss in just a moment. So some of the key features inside of CodeSite which make it rather unique is that there are logging classes that provide the ability to capture data rather than a log function. So there's lots of methods, lots of ways of capturing data with single line statements that make it very simple to extract information from your code. Another benefit is it doesn't interrupt your application flow. So it's not causing focus changes or window changes and things like that. Great for debugging paint routines or keyboard focus parsing. You can easily log complex data structures like entire objects. One of the really unique things about CodeSite is its ability to group data and messages by user-defined categories rather than arbitrary log levels. As we'll see in the demonstration, this gives us a lot more flexibility when it comes to controlling the amount of information we want to capture. There's many ways to configure your CodeSite objects when it comes to destinations, how you want what certain types of information to capture. And on top of all of that, there are specially designed tools for analyzing the data that you do capture. And that makes it that much more effective in locating your problems. As noted earlier, there are two editions for CodeSite. There's an Express edition, which is included in RAD Studio, and it has been included since the XE release. It provides basic logging data types, so your simple strings and integers and things like that. You can log to the live viewer or a local log file. When we go to the Studio edition, we have a lot more data types that we have access to. So images, collections, XML data, system information, etc. Remote destinations, as I noted before, we can log by date. There's a high precision timer. Even has access to writing information to the Windows event log with dedicated methods for that purpose. And there's even a method tracer for automatically adding in CodeSite statements to your Delphi units. So rather than show a bunch of slides, let's get in and actually see CodeSite in action. As you can see, I have RAD Studio XE8 running. I have a new VCL Forms application created. I am doing this in Delphi, but the same techniques would apply to C++ Builder as well. I am, as you can also see, running under Windows 10, and so using the latest operating system from Microsoft. So to get started, I'm simply going to drop a new button on this form, and we're going to do a quick live demo to see how we get started using CodeSite. And one of the things I always tell developers when they first start using it is anytime you thought about using a show message to show information, send it to CodeSite instead. And before we get started in adding any statements, the quickest thing to do is add the CodeSite logging unit to your uses clause. Once you add that, you have access to all the logging classes, and one you get by default is named CodeSite, and it's already created for you. And what we can see is there is a whole list of various methods that we can call that all start with send and some variant of that. Send itself is quite overloaded, as we can see as we start to type. So I'm going to say my first CodeSite message, and go ahead and simply run this. And by doing so, my application's running. I can go ahead and click on the button, and we see that the CodeSite Live Viewer gets displayed for us. And we can see that, oh, here is our first CodeSite message. But it's not just the text that's recorded when we do this. If we pull up the little message pane, we can see that we know what application it came from, what computer it's running under, the process ID, even the thread in which this message was captured. And of course, you'd get date and time information. And if I go and click it again, I get the message that shows up. Of course, you can add in various pieces, like if we wanted to know the date and time, go ahead and add those, and they show up in the display for us. And so it optimizes how much space is needed for that. And we can keep those off for the moment. We'll come back and add a couple more of these a little bit later on. One of the really cool things that we can do is also send out an entire object. And so if I were to go, well, I'll just change say the height of the form and send over the height. And then I'm also going to do codesite.send, and I'll say main form, and I'll pass in self. And so I'm doing several different variations here. I want to send the height of the form as well as the main form itself. And let's go and send button 1 as well, which is what I just dropped on the form. So let's go ahead and run this and see what our display looks like. We'll bring back our viewer, bring up our option, click that. We have a number of more messages here. The height is for this, and now we have a new icon. These are informational messages, but then we have message content icons also, and this is an object, which means that we have more data. And if we go ahead and click on the inspector pane, we get a list of all of the published properties associated with the main form. It even drops in and expresses out the different anchor values and the border icon values for those sets of information that's there. We do the same thing for button 1, and so we can drill down and see what font information is currently selected for that. Where this really gets powerful is as we make changes to our object, say our form, and we relog at a different time, we can bring back that timestamp, for example. We can see that we have some time change between the two. If I select both items in the list, I get a difference between the two objects and which properties between them have varied, and we get to see what those current values are. And likewise, the same can be done for the buttons, but because the buttons didn't change, their property values match. So being able to compare objects is a very powerful way to analyze some of the information. Now, instead of going through coding in each of the statements to show you what we can log, I have a pre-built application that we'll use to dig in a little bit deeper into all of this. And it's called the CodeSite Message Generator. And it's a pre-built application, has the code statements being executed right in the display here, so we know what's going on. This is pretty much showing what we talked about before, except instead of just informational messages, we actually now have different types. So we have notes and reminders and errors and warnings and so forth. There's multiple different levels of message contents that we can use, all to provide the developer with ways to categorize and group informational pieces that they're interested in. You can also format date and time values, etc. We already seen an example of sending an object, but we also have built-in support for string lists, which is really nice to be able to send out a list of items. We use string lists all the time, and sending out all the fonts that are currently installed on the system and getting a current quick look that I have 128 fonts installed. Looking and inspecting a piece of a color value, changing that, seeing what the RGB values and the HSL values is all built into one statement called send color. We can also see the contents of a file, get a binary representation of those files, etc. I've already talked about sending the objects. So this was the two forms that we This can be sent when the color property was changed in between them. We also have the ability to display collection items. It's the full collection, so we're sending out the panels in this statement. Well, the whole status panels comes in and we get each item that we can select and then view the details of each of those items in it, all within one statement. So very powerful way to capture data in your applications. The image support is very powerful. Being able to send out any image that you want and have it recorded into your log is quite useful. Whether it's a regular image, an icon, screenshots are extremely helpful, where we can get a capture of exactly what was going on, and we can scale this or stretch it as appropriate. We can also do that at the full desktop level. I wouldn't recommend sending a full size desktop at 24-bit or 32-bit color depth across the network, but it could be done. Just realize it might take up a lot of space. If you're running under Windows, Win32, Win64, which is what our targets support, we have built-in support for that. So extracting version information out of your applications is quite simple with a send version info call. Being able to get the system information of how the system is configured. So screen resolution, color depth, build versions. Great ways to get information about an application before you run it so that you know what type of machine it's running under. Extracting version information out of the application, accessing keys in the registry to extract data, all things built into the function, the logging classes that we have access to. The checkpoints is actually a very simple concept, but extremely useful. What it does is for each logger that you have, it will record and automatically increment a checkpoint counter. And where this is useful are in iterative processes that can cause problems. For example, if I'm iterating through a list and there's some problem in the middle of it, what do? We set up a breakpoint, we run through it, F9, stepping through each iteration, and then we finally get the exception or the error, and we've either lost count or we've miscounted. Much easier to just add a checkpoint into the loop. You can reset it at the beginning. When I go ahead and run this, I see that I've recorded, I have 27 items in the song. I'm only getting through number 9, and then it's failing. So I now can dig deeper into this list, find out what's wrong with number 10, number 9, and maybe it's a parsing problem or who knows. But again, it's a piece of information that we can use to drill down into our code and locate those problems more quickly. CodeSite supports the ability to record and capture custom data. That includes data sets, records, and even tables themselves. There's a way to do custom formatting. And so we can send out, say, example, the current record that's selected and get a snapshot of each piece of data that's available there. You can also get an entire tree worth of data captured in your log and being able to see each of the different pieces that are there. I wouldn't recommend this with a million record table, but for small data sets, being able to see what is being generated or saved or even accessed, great way to get that rich information. XML is extremely powerful and popular as a data transfer mechanism, but it's in a variety of formats. Of course, you can use the stringless capabilities or even the file-based methods to be able to access different XML data, but CodeSite also provides an XML data method. So send XML data and send XML file based on what your content is. When you do that, you actually get a structured view of your XML data. One, it can be in a syntax highlighted view, showing you the different nodes and elements inside of your XML data, and no matter what you are viewing, the structure and format is the same, complete with collapsible nodes to navigate it. But there's also a syntactical view, and this allows you to drill into the actual structure of the XML data rather than the tags as more prominent. So this gives you a real sense of how the XML is structured versus the syntactical elements of it. And so we can see that we have a list of employees, and each employee has different elements. Of course, you can drill into each of these and extract those out into your view. And this setting is persistent across different XML files and even sessions of your CodeSite log viewer. We talked about custom data with respect to data sets. You can also have tree structures inside your list. This is actually showing the controls hierarchy of a form, so all of the parenting that's going on of which controls are parented by whom, starting at the main form down to the panels, the page control with each tab sheet, etc. At this point, we can look at the data that we've captured, and we have quite a bit of data even just here. In addition to all the message information that we're capturing, the timestamps, the message type, as well as the content, very useful. But as what we can see is everything is pretty much just a dump of data. And we really don't have good context of where we are while we're executing this code. And that's where the method tracing methods come into play, specifically enter method and exit method. And what this allows us to do is group our logging statements together. In this particular example, I have a little calculator program that I'm going to enter in an equation, and I have a number of methods that are involved: the clicking of the buttons, the operators, calculating the expression once I click the equal sign, and we'll see how this all works together. What I've captured in addition here is that I'm using multiple loggers. So instead of using the general global CodeSite logger, I'm using one called CS calculator and another called CS expression. The calculator is simply going to be used for the operations of the calculator. The expression is used by the expression class, which is used to actually parse the data and do the actual evaluation of the expression. So let's take a look at what this is about. If I do 6 times 2, and what we can see, a couple different things. One, we have a new color that's showing up, and that's because this logger, this calculator logger, was created specifying that this light purple color be used for this category. And the category has a name of calculator. We can see how the formula is being built up. So the 6 was clicked, the formula is just 6, x the times. We build up the formula all the way to the end. Now let me go ahead and click the equal sign, and we can see that we have a new object, new logger in here called expression. And the expression's parse method was called. It had parsed out the expression string, figuring out that the two arguments were 6 and 2, and the operator was the multiply operator. It then goes and returns back the expression object that can be evaluated, and the evaluated result here comes back as 12, which is what we would expect. Where this gets useful is if let's dig in a little bit deeper into the viewer here, and we have quite a bit of information. Imagine it was a much more complicated process, larger equation. But what if I didn't really care about the calculator messaging? I had already tested that. I know that the calculator is working correctly, but I seem to be having a problem with my expressions, and I want to really just focus on that. Well, one easy way, if you've set it up, is you can turn off each of your loggers. So if I turn off the calculator logger, I can go in and clear out my expression. I can type in something new, 9 plus 12. Notice how no new messages are coming into the log. Only when I click the expression, the equal sign, do the expression log messages come into play. And so this allows me to filter what I want to see and only capture the data that's of value. When you disable a logger, no CodeSite logging statements will actually generate data in those statements. They simply get ignored and skipped, which can be quite flexible for being able to capture things. Well, what if I don't have the ability to turn them on or off dynamically in our application. Is there anything I can do in the viewer itself after I've captured the data? And that's where the multiple views come in. So for example, I can select a message I'm interested in, click the new view button, and say, you know, I want to see all expression category messages. Go ahead and click this. The auto name will give it the name matching the category you're on. Go ahead and click OK, and now we see only the messages that are part of the expression category, and we can navigate between the two as needed. One nice thing with the multiple views, we have a synchronized selected message mode. When you're dealing with multiple views, you may be interested in knowing that, okay, at this point when I had done the parse, where in the grand scheme of all the messaging, or say another view, when did that take place? If you turn on the mode, it changes the icon, and when I switch to another view, it will highlight that message or the closest matching method in time where that took place. So next, we can move to the scratch pad, which is another area inside of the live viewer, and this allows you to capture very transient data in a dynamic way. So for example, mouse moves traditionally very cumbersome to log because the only one of value is the last one. You don't want to fill your log with a bunch of XY coordinate values when you're really just interested in the last one. It's also good for recording criteria. Anything that you add to the list will get automatically added, highlights it as it gets updated. We can select something and delete it or clear out the entire list. As we go and write to the scratch pad, it automatically adds new items as necessary. So a great way to capture information that you want to have around but not necessarily fill in your whole log file. So I'll turn those back off for a second. And then the next piece, final piece I want to illustrate for CodeSite here is, well, two things. One, it's the CodeSite manager, which is an object that's available that manages all of the loggers that are used in your application. And so I have an example of some sample messages that I can get generated. So these are a variety of message types. It does some little processing, has a new category of messages. If I turn off the CodeSite manager, if I disable that, none of those messages will go through. So whether the individual logger is disabled or the CodeSite manager is disabled, both of them have to be true for the messages to get generated. Assuming that is true, and the reason why we have that capability in there is so that if you go and deploy this your application with the CodeSite logging intact, then you may want to have it turned off until there's a problem that needs to be reported or that the end user runs into, and you could provide an option or a registry setting or an INI file entry, config file, you name it, as a way to turn on the logging capabilities that you would do. Now, with that in mind, if you're going to do logging, live logging is great for your development and your debugging cycles. It's not often the best approach for an end user. Sometimes, though, it is. If your end users are comfortable with analyzing the data, looking at it, then it may be very useful for them. Kind of depends on the environment that you're working in. But more times than not, you'll want to be able to capture the same information into a log file. And that's done by changing the destinations that are used. And the way we do that is we can change from the viewer to a log file. And if we go ahead and change that, and I'm going to generate the same messages, but we'll see that they don't show up inside of my viewer here. But if I go over to my documents directory and my CodeSite logs, I should have a new log file that is set up here, and I can open that up inside the CodeSite file viewer, and all the same information is there. And the file viewer is nearly equivalent to the live viewer, except you can have multiple file viewers because you can have multiple log files that can be accessed. You don't have the scratch pad since that's a live functionality piece, and obviously won't, you can't send messages to the file viewer. It simply accesses individual files and inspects them. But you have all the same capabilities of inspecting all the properties of a given object and see what those values are. What's nice is that the live viewer and the file viewer are both redistributable, so you can deploy those with your applications. And the next example that I want to show illustrates another piece of the puzzle, and that is the ability for managing multiple threads and how we can get some really good information from that. So let me go ahead and dig into here. I have a new application. This is actually the thread demo. Oh, I believe I already have it running. Here we go. Let me reset this. And this is the old VCL demo that came with Delphi and C++ Builder about threads and managing multiple threads for sorting. And what I've done is I've added in CodeSite statements and new categories for each of the different sorting capabilities, and I'm going to record those into my viewer, and we're going to see just what this looks like when we do that. So let me go ahead and run that. We can see that the sorts happened and it's finished, and I can move this all around even though my viewer is still capturing data. I can turn that off if I don't need to get the live updates of everything. And one of the benefits, even though it's still working, is my application's done. And that is because when we are logging, the logging and the writing to the file or sending to the viewer is actually done by the process called the CodeSite dispatcher. And that's a process that runs in the background whether or not the icon is available and the system tray is configurable. By default it's not. It's only accessible if you're on a developer machine or you've turned it on. And what it allows you to do is you can have multiple applications all generating your CodeSite messages. They all get out of the process of your application, so they're not affecting the your application doesn't get affected by the writing of the log file, the management of the parts. All of that's handled by the dispatcher. Even sending remotely is all done by the dispatcher. So what's really cool is now if we go to our logger here, I do like looking at this in the live viewer because we can get a sense for how the processor has actually started to work with this. I'm looking at just all the messages, and let me bring up the thread because that might be easier. I don't really need the category or the date time at this point, but I can see that it's just cycling through each of the different threads that are being used. And it's not until we get a little bit later on that we start now switching between just the two of them, the selection sort and the bubble sort. And then eventually we scroll down some more and we get just the bubble sort, because of course that's the least efficient of the whole bunch, and that's why it was the last one to fill. But this isn't very useful. What would be much more useful is to see, well, how many swaps were each of the different sorts. One quick way to do that is to organize your messages. So we open up the organize message dialog, we go ahead and let's create a new view based on each thread that's in the list. So we see that new views were created for each thread in the list. So of course we have the all messages, but we have the bubble sort, the selection sort, and the quick sort. And when we select an active view, we get the number of messages, number of items in the list for each view. So 3,200 out of the 4,400 were all related to the bubble sort. And what's really nice is I can select the enter method for the bubble sort and the exit method, and the time difference took about 5 seconds for it to do that sort between the two. If I go to the selection sort, I can see that there's only about 1,000 items that swaps that took place. I can again select the two items and see that it took about 2 seconds to do that type of work. Going to the quick sort should be a lot better. That's down to 219 number of swaps. And what did we get down for our timing there? It was a half a second. And so there's some real value that we can get by capturing data, just a few items, run it, react, and analyze what we're seeing inside of our logs.